I managed a secret roster of 40 pilots who were paid $8 million a year to sit on their couches and watch Netflix. My new boss called them parasites and fired every single one of them on a Tuesday. By Friday, he had stranded 50,000 passengers, grounded 300 jets, and turned a billion-dollar airline into a parking lot. He thought he was saving money. He didn't realize that by firing the people who do nothing, he just guaranteed that nothing would ever fly again. I'm Elias Thorne. And this is how I watch the world burn from the safety of my living room. The heartbeat of an airline is not the roar of a jet engine, it is the silence of a problem that never happens. I was the architect of that silence. My name is Elias Thorne, and for 15 years, I sat in the bridge, a raised glass platform overlooking the Operations Control Center, OCC, of Aether Airlines in Dallas. Below me, 200 dispatchers, meteorologists, and crew schedulers hummed with the frantic energy of a hive, managing 300 aluminum tubes hurtling through the stratosphere at 500 miles per hour. My job title was Director of Crew Operations. My actual job was to play three-dimensional chess against chaos. Chaos always wants to win. A pilot gets the flu in Boston. A de-icing truck breaks down in Minneapolis. A flight attendant times out on federal duty limits in Miami. If you react to these problems, you lose. The only way to win is to predict them, to place a piece on the board before the opponent even moves. My piece was the shadow crew. It was a roster of 40 elite pilots and 40 flight attendants. They were the strategic reserve. We paid them full salary, roughly $8 million a year in total payroll, to sit at home, bags packed, uniforms ironed, doing absolutely nothing. To the uneducated eye, they were dead weight. To me, they were the oxygen mask you pray you never have to drop from the ceiling. Then came Julian Vane. Julian was 38, wore suits cut so sharp they could draw blood, and had the soulless, dead-eyed stare of a private equity algorithm made flesh. He had been installed by the board to optimize the company ahead of a potential merger. He didn't know the difference between a rudder and an aileron, but he knew how to slash a red line on a spreadsheet. It was 9 a.m. on a Tuesday when his assistant summoned me to the fishbowl of the soundproof glass office that overlooked the OCC floor. Julian didn't ask me to sit. He was standing by the window, staring down at the dispatchers with a look of mild disgust, as if he were watching ants devour a picnic. "Elias," he said, without turning around. "I've been auditing your department's panel statement." "I assumed you would," I said, standing comfortably with my hands in my pockets. I knew my numbers. I ran the tightest ship in the industry. Julian turned. He walked to his desk, picked up a single sheet of paper, and slid it across the glass surface. It was a list of names. "This list," Julian said, tapping it with a manicured fingernail. "Captain Miller. Captain Vance. First Officer Jong. According to my data, these employees have flown 0 revenue hours in the last 60 days. Yet, they have collected full salary, per diem, and benefits." "That is correct," I said. "That is the shadow crew." "Shadow crew," Julian repeated, tasting the words like spoiled milk. "It sounds like a spy novel. In finance, we have a different word for people who get paid to do nothing. We call them parasites." "They aren't parasites, Julian. They are insurance. An airline is a clock. It relies on perfect synchronization. But the world is messy. Storms happen. Sickness happens. When a line pilot times out in a hub like Chicago, you can't just wish a new pilot into existence. The shadow crew are hot spares. They step in so the flight doesn't cancel. They save us 10 times their salary in lost revenue and brand damage." Julian smiled. It was a terrifying expression, a baring of teeth that conveyed no warmth, only predation. "You see, Elias, that's the difference between you and me. You operate on fear. You hedge against what if. I operate on data." He clicked a mouse on his desk, bringing up a graph on the large wall monitor. "I had the analytics team run a simulation," Julian said. "If we move to a just-in-time crew model, pushing our active pilots to the federal maximum flight hours and eliminating the reserve buffer, we increase our operating margin by 12%. 12%, Elias. That's the difference between a good quarter and a legendary one. It's also the difference between a functioning airline and a parking lot," I shot back, my voice hardening. "You can't cheat a human being. Pilots get tired. They get sick. If you run the roster at 100% capacity, you have zero slack. One snowstorm in Denver will topple the entire network." "I'm willing to take that risk," Julian said dismissively. "The probability of a catastrophic system failure is statistically negligible compared to the guaranteed savings of $8 million. He picked up the list of names again. "Which is why," he continued, "I have already acted. As of 8 a.m. this morning, termination notices were sent to every member of the shadow crew." The air left the room. I stared at him, feeling a cold shock radiate through my chest. "You fired them?" I whispered. "Without consulting me? I don't need to consult the janitor before I throw out the trash," Julian said. "They are gone. Off the payroll. We are lean now, Elias. We are efficient." He picked up a second envelope from his desk. This one had my name on it. "And that brings us to you." He slid the envelope across the desk. "Your management style is antiquated," Julian said, checking his watch as if I were boring him. "You build buffers. You build safety nets. That is expensive thinking. We need agile thinking. We need someone who isn't afraid to run the engine in the red." I didn't reach for the envelope. "You're firing me." "We are eliminating your position," he corrected. "Ben, your senior scheduler, has agreed to take over as interim director. He's much more malleable. He understands the vision." I looked through the glass wall. I saw Ben down in the pit, staring up at us. He looked pale. He looked terrified. Ben was a good kid, but he was a yes man. He would drive the bus off the cliff if the GPS told him to. I felt a strange sensation. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was clarity. I realized, in that moment, that Julian Vane wasn't just greedy, he was structurally incompetent. He had pulled the control rods out of a nuclear reactor to save money on lead, and he was smiling about the improved heat output. I could have fought him. I could have gone to the board. I could have screamed about FAA Part 117 regulations and the fragility of hub and spoke networks. But I looked at his shark-like grin, and I realized, he needs to learn. Some lessons cannot be taught in a PowerPoint. Some lessons have to be burned into you. I picked up the envelope. "You're making a mistake, Julian," I said quietly. "I think the shareholders will disagree," he replied, turning his back to me to look out the window. "Please leave your badge at the front desk. Security will escort you out." I walked out of the fishbowl. The hum of the OCC floor felt different now. It didn't sound like a well-oiled machine anymore. It sounded like a bomb ticking. I walked to my desk. I didn't pack everything. I left my manuals. I left my contact lists. I left the emergency protocols I had written by hand over a decade. If he wanted to run a lean operation, he could run it without my institutional knowledge. Ben walked up to me, trembling. "Elias. I didn't ask for this. He just told me." "It's okay, Ben," I said, putting a hand on his shoulder. "Listen to me closely." "Yeah? When the board goes red, and it will go red, don't call me." "Elias, come on. What do I do if we get a weather event?" I looked at the big board. 300 green chevrons moving across the map. Beautiful. Fragile. Doomed. "You update your resume," I said. I walked to the elevator. I swiped my badge one last time. The light turned green. I walked out into the humid Dallas heat. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Captain Miller, the most experienced pilot on the Shadow roster. "Miller, just got the email. Terminated effective immediately. Is this a joke?" I stopped at my car. I looked back at the glistening glass headquarters of Aether Airlines. I imagined Julian Vane up there, counting his saved millions, planning his bonus, thinking he had tricked the system. I typed back. "Me, it's real, Jim. Go home. Don't answer your phone. And buy some popcorn." "Miller, popcorn?" "Me, because the show is about to start." I got in my car and drove away. I didn't look back. Julian had removed the Shadow crew. He had removed me. He thought he had cut the fat. He had no idea he had just severed the spinal cord. The silence of a Tuesday morning in the suburbs is heavier than the noise of a jet engine. For 15 years, my biological clock had been synchronized to the rhythmic pulses of the morning push, the 6 a.m. departures out of O'Hare, the 7 a.m. bank out of Dallas. My cortisol levels were permanently redlined to anticipate the inevitable phone call about a broken hydraulic pump or a missing flight attendant. Now, sitting on my back porch with a mug of coffee that was actually hot, the only sound was a neighbor's leaf blower. It felt wrong. It felt like the eerie quiet of the ocean right before a tsunami pulls the water back from the shore. I reached for my phone. It was a phantom limb reflex. My thumb hovered over the FlightAware app icon. I wanted to check the status of Aether 402 out of Boston. I wanted to know if the de-icing crews in Minneapolis were on station. I forced my hand down. "Not my circus," I whispered to the empty yard. "Not my monkeys." But I knew the monkeys. I knew them by name. And I knew that right now, in the Circus 10 of the Operations Control Center, the acrobats were performing on the high wire without a net, while the ringmaster counted his money. While I was learning how to sleep past 4 a.m., Julian Vane was taking a victory lap. The quarterly board meeting took place in the executive penthouse suite, 40 floors above the tarmac. Julian stood at the head of the mahogany table, flanked by projection screens displaying graphs that shot upward like the trajectory of a rocket. "Efficiency," Julian told the board members, clicking a laser pointer at a bar chart that showed a dramatic drop in operating costs. "It is the last frontier of profitability. For a decade, this airline has operated with a safety blanket so thick it was suffocating our margins." He clicked to the next slide. It showed the payroll reduction from the restructuring. $8.2 million annual savings. By eliminating the strategic reserve, the so-called shadow crew, and optimizing our active roster utilization, we have achieved a theoretical efficiency rate of 98%, Julian boasted. "We are running leaner than Spirit. We are running faster than Southwest." "Theoretical?" an older board member asked, squinting at the numbers. He was a former pilot, one of the few who remembered the days before algorithms ran the world. "What happens when it rains, Julian? What happens when a crew times out?" "We fly through it," Julian smiled, the shark-like grin widening. "We have moved to a dynamic resourcing model. If we have gaps, we fill them with overtime. We incentivize the active pilots to pick up extra trips. We run lean. We run fast." The board members looked at the stock price ticker running along the bottom of the screen. Aether Airlines was up 4% since the announcement. Wall Street loved the word lean. It sounded disciplined. It sounded modern. It sounded like money. They applauded. Down in the fishbowl, Ben, my replacement, was not applauding. He was staring at the crew scheduling monitor, his face bathed in the blue light of a potential crisis. His hands were shaking slightly as he held his headset. "I have a sick call in Atlanta," a junior scheduler shouted from across the pit. "First officer on flight 882. Food poisoning." "Who's on reserve?" Ben asked, his voice cracking. He instinctively looked for the shadow tab on his screen, the one I had built for him. It wasn't there. "Nobody," the scheduler replied. The reserve list is empty. Julian fired them all on Tuesday. Okay, Ben said, wiping sweat from his forehead. Check the inbound flights. Is there anyone deadheading? There's a first officer landing in 40 minutes. Faux Lewis. But if we put him on the 882, he'll be pushing his Part 117 duty limits. He'll have exactly 30 minutes of buffer before he times out. If he hits a headwind, or if the taxi line is long, he turns into a pumpkin. Do it, Ben ordered, closing his eyes. Assign him. If he flies fast, he makes it. It was a gamble. A massive, reckless gamble with federal regulations. But the winds were favorable. Faux Lewis landed, sprinted through the terminal with his tie flapping over his shoulder, boarded the 882, and the plane pushed back with 4 minutes to spare. Up in the boardroom, Julian Vane checked his phone. He saw the on-time departure notification. He smiled at the board members. See? He said. The system works. For the first 7 days, the universe conspired to make Julian Vane look like a genius. It was the Golden Week. A high-pressure system parked itself over the entire continental United States. The skies were crystal clear from Seattle to Miami. There were no thunderstorms in the Midwest. No fog in San Francisco. No nor'easters in Boston. The mechanical reliability of the fleet was perfect. I watched it from my living room TV. I saw the stats on CNBC. Aether Airlines posts record on-time performance for the week following restructuring. He's going to get away with it, I muttered to my wife, Sarah, over dinner. Maybe he's right, she said gently, passing me the potatoes. Maybe you were too cautious, Elias. You always worried about everything. I worried so they didn't have to, I said. You don't take the airbags out of your car just because you haven't crashed in 10 years. Right now, he's driving 100 miles per hour on a straight road. He thinks he's a Formula One driver. He doesn't know there's a hairpin turn coming. My phone buzzed on the table. It was Captain Jim Miller, the fired shadow pilot. Miller, you watching this? 99% completion factor. Vane looks like the Messiah. I picked up the phone and typed back. Me, it's fool's gold, Jim. Look at the crew duty times. Check the logs. They are burning the furniture to heat the house. I had logged into the employee portal, my credentials still hadn't been revoked, another security oversight by the new regime, and checked the pilot logs. The numbers were terrifying. The active pilots were exhausted. They were flying 6 days a week. They were picking up premium pay overtime shifts because the money was good, but fatigue is cumulative. The green board wasn't a sign of health. It was the flush skin of a fever. The first crack appeared on a Thursday in Phoenix. It wasn't a weather event. It was a scheduling error. The new just-in-time algorithm, designed by Julian's expensive data scientists, had scheduled a flight attendant crew to land in Phoenix at 2 p.m. and depart on a different flight at 2:45 p.m. 45 minutes. That is the bare minimum legal turn time. It assumes the first plane lands exactly on time, the door opens instantly, and the crew can teleport across the terminal. But the inbound flight was 20 minutes late due to a slow fuel truck. The crew landed at 2:20 p.m. They had to deplane, run through the terminal to a different concourse, and board the new jet. In the old days, I would have had a shadow crew sitting in the Phoenix lounge, drinking coffee. I would have swapped them in. 0 delay. But there was no shadow crew. The plane sat at the gate. The passengers boarded. And they waited for the out-of-breath crew to sprint through the terminal. The flight pushed back 30 minutes late. Julian Vane was in the OCC when the yellow light flashed on the board. Why is Phoenix yellow? He demanded. Crew connection was tight, sir, Ben mumbled, staring at his shoes. They ran as fast as they could. 30 minutes isn't a disaster, Julian scoffed. Make up the time in the air. Burn a little extra fuel. Get it back to green. Yes, sir. They burned the fuel. They landed only 10 minutes late. Julian noted it in his daily log. Recovered. Minor friction. System resilient. He didn't see the fatigue in the flight attendant's eyes. He didn't see the disgruntled passengers who missed their connections in Houston because of that minor 30 minutes. He only saw the arrival time. Friday night. The end of the second week. I went to a bar near the airport called The Final Approach. It was a dive bar where pilots hung out during layovers. I met Jim Miller there. He looked 10 years younger since he stopped being on call, wearing a Hawaiian shirt and holding a pint of Guinness. To the unemployed, Jim toasted. To the lucky, I corrected. So, Jim said, wiping foam from his lip. I heard a rumor. I still have buddies on the line. They say the scheduling department is on the verge of a mutiny. Ben has slept in his office for 3 nights. Ben's a good kid, I said. He's trying to hold back the ocean with a spoon. The active roster is tapped out, Elias, Jim said, his voice dropping. They have 0 reserves left. Everyone is flying max hours. If one person calls in sick, just one, the whole house of cards falls down. They are calling guys on their days off offering 200% pay. Nobody is picking up. Why not? Because they're angry, Jim said. They know what Vane did to us. They know he cut the safety net. They aren't going to bail him out so he can get his bonus. It's a silent strike. I looked up at the TV in the corner of the bar. The Weather Channel was on. The forecaster was standing in front of a map of the Midwest. We are tracking a developing low-pressure system coming out of Canada, the weatherman said. It looks messy. Cold front meeting warm moist air from the Gulf. Could see some significant turbulence and precipitation around the Great Lakes by Monday. Jim followed my gaze. He saw the map. He saw the swirl of white clouds gathering over the Dakotas. Chicago, Jim whispered. Chicago, I agreed. Chicago O'Hare was Aether Airlines' biggest hub. 40% of our traffic went through ORD. It was the aorta of the heart. If that hits, Jim said, and they have no reserves, then the patient goes into cardiac arrest. I finished my drink. I felt a strange mixture of vindication and dread. I didn't want the airline to fail. I had spent 15 years building it. I knew the gate agents. I knew the rampers. But I also knew Julian Vane. And I knew that hubris always demands a price. I paid the tab. As I walked out into the humid Texas night, I checked the weather map one last time. It wasn't just Chicago. There was a secondary system forming over the Rockies. A blizzard warning for Denver. Julian Vane was asleep in his penthouse, dreaming of his bonus. Ben was asleep on a cot in the OCC, dreaming of green lights. And somewhere in Chicago, a captain named Sarah Jenkins was sitting down at a seafood restaurant. She ordered the oysters. She didn't know the oysters were bad. She didn't know that the bacteria multiplying in her gut was about to change the course of aviation history. She just put a squeeze of lemon on the shell, tipped it back, and swallowed the catastrophe whole. The clock struck midnight. The Golden Week was over. The wind off Lake Michigan whipped against the double-pane glass of the Hilton O'Hare, a low, moaning sound that usually lulled Captain Sarah Jenkins to sleep. But at 4:15 a.m. on a Monday, sleep was a biological impossibility. Sarah was a 20-year veteran of the skies, a woman who had landed C-130s on dirt strips in Kandahar and wrestled Boeing 777s through typhoons in the South China Sea without sweating through her uniform. She was made of steel and caffeine. But the chef's special Kumamoto oysters she had consumed at dinner were currently dismantling her from the inside out. Sarah lay on the cold porcelain tiles of the hotel bathroom, pressing her feverish forehead against the ceramic, waiting for the room to stop spinning. She checked her watch, her vision blurring. Pickup was at 6 o'clock. Departure at 8 o'clock. She was commanding Aether Flight 882 to London Heathrow, the crown jewel of the network, carrying 280 passengers and 12 tons of high-priority cargo. She tried to stand. Her legs buckled. A wave of nausea hit her with the force of a turbulence pocket, sending her back to the floor. She knew the stakes. She had read the memos. She knew the shadow crew, the 3 reserve captains who used to sit in the crew lounge drinking coffee for exactly this scenario, had been fired to save $8 million. If she didn't walk onto that jet, nobody walked onto that jet. But gravity and biology are the only 2 forces a pilot cannot negotiate with. With a trembling hand, she reached for her phone on the bath mat. She dialed the confidential crew scheduling hotline. It rang once. Twice. Crew scheduling, this is Mark. Mark, Sarah rasped, her voice sounding like it was being dragged over gravel. This is Captain Jenkins. ID 4922. I am calling out unfit. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy. Mark knew what unfit meant. It wasn't a request. It was a declaration of legal incapacity. Under federal law, a pilot who declares themselves unfit cannot be touched. Captain, Mark said, his voice tightening with a panic that wasn't about her health, but about the empty screen in front of him. Are you absolutely sure? We have 0 coverage in ORD. The reserve list is blank. I can't stand up, Mark, Sarah whispered, clutching her stomach as another cramp seized her. I'm sorry. The plane isn't going anywhere. She dropped the phone, crawled back into the bed, and pulled the duvet over her head. She felt a pang of guilt, the deep professional shame of the reliable employee letting the team down. But she didn't know that she wasn't just canceling a flight. She was lighting a fuse. 1,000 miles away in the windowless bunker of the Operations Control Center in Dallas, the red alert light flashed on Ben's console like a gunshot wound. Crew alert, Captain Open, FLT 882, ORD LHR. Ben, the interim director, stared at the notification. He blinked, hoping it was a system glitch. Flight 882 was the revenue juggernaut. It required a specific type of pilot, a Boeing 777 captain with international relief certification. You couldn't just grab a guy flying a 737 to St. Louis and stick him in the left seat of a wide-body jet. Okay, Ben whispered to himself, his hands hovering over the keyboard. Don't panic. Work the problem. Find the spare. He instinctively moved his mouse to the tab labeled Strategic Reserve. It was muscle memory. For 5 years working under Elias, that tab had been the panic button. Click it, find Captain Miller, assign him, problem solved in 30 seconds. He clicked the tab. No records found. The reality of Julian Vane's efficiency hit Ben in the chest. There was no depth. There was no bench. Mark. Ben shouted across the pit. Check the inbound list. Who is landing in Chicago before 7 a.m. that is 777 qualified? I have Captain Holloway, Mark shouted back, his voice high and thin. He's bringing in the red-eye from Seattle. Lands at 6:15. Turn him, Ben ordered. Put him on the London flight. I can't. Mark said. Holloway has been flying for 8 hours. The London leg is another 8. That puts him at 16 hours of duty. The FAA hard limit is 14. He'd be illegal over the Atlantic. What about a waiver? Can we get pilot concurrence? Ben, he physically cannot fly that long. Unless you want him to sleep while landing at Heathrow, he times out. It's illegal. Ben rubbed his face. The air conditioning in the room felt freezing, yet he was sweating. Okay. Deadhead. Find me a pilot in New York or Atlanta. Put them on a plane now. Mark brought up the weather map. The Canadian low-pressure system just parked over the northeast. Ground stop at LaGuardia. Atlanta is bogged down with thunderstorms. Even if we launch a pilot this second, they don't land in Chicago until 10 a.m. We miss the landing slot at Heathrow. We pay a £50,000 fine, and the return flight cancels anyway. Ben stared at the screen. It was a logic puzzle with no solution. It was a square peg and a round hole, and Julian Vane had sold the hammer. Wake him up, Ben said, dread pooling in his stomach. Call Julian. Julian Vane walked onto the OCC floor 20 minutes later wearing a $400 tracksuit and holding an espresso, looking more annoyed than concerned. He treated the emergency like a waiter getting an order wrong. It's one pilot, Ben, Julian said, leaning over the console, smelling of expensive cologne. One pilot with a stomachache. Why is the board red? Because it's the London flight, sir, Ben said, his voice trembling. And we have no one to fly it. We employ 3,000 pilots, Julian snapped. Find one. I've checked the entire roster, Ben said, pointing to the sea of grayed out names. Everyone qualified is either currently flying, timed out, or in the wrong city. The only qualified captain in Chicago is Sarah Jenkins, and she is vomiting in the Hilton. Julian looked at the screen. He didn't see the safety regulations. He didn't see the human physiology. He saw a math problem that was costing him money. Call her back, Julian commanded. Ben froze. The room went silent. Sir? Call Captain Jenkins back. Tell her we'll give her triple pay. Tell her we'll give her a $5,000 cash bonus if she powers through. It's probably just indigestion. She can take an antacid and sit in the chair. The first officer can do the heavy lifting. Mr. Vane, Ben said slowly, standing up. I cannot do that. It is a violation of Federal Aviation Regulation Part 117. If a pilot calls out unfit, we cannot coerce them to fly. If the FAA found out we pressured a sick pilot to operate a heavy jet, they would pull our operating certificate. It's a federal crime. Julian's jaw tightened. His eyes narrowed. I'm not talking about coercion. I'm talking about motivation. Everyone has a price, Ben. She couldn't stand up, sir, Mark piped up from the corner, shrinking back when Julian glared at him. Julian slammed his hand on the desk, rattling the monitors. This is ridiculous. We are going to cancel a $500,000 revenue flight because one person ate bad seafood? Where is the redundancy? You fired the redundancy, Ben whispered. The words hung in the air. Julian turned slowly to look at him. What did you say? The shadow crew, Ben said, his voice gaining a desperate strength. Elias kept 3 777 captains on reserve in Chicago for this exact scenario. If we had them, this plane would leave on time. But we don't. So the plane isn't going anywhere. Julian stared at the big board. He stared at the flashing red chevron of Flight 882. For the first time, the math wasn't working. He realized that the waste he had cut was actually the load-bearing wall of the house. Cancel it, Julian hissed through gritted teeth. Cancel the flight. Rebook the passengers. Sir, Ben warned. If we cancel the outbound leg, the plane stays in Chicago. That means there is no plane in London for the return flight tomorrow. We have to cancel the London to Chicago leg too. And the crew waiting in London. They will time out. I said cancel it. Julian shouted, turning on his heel and storming back toward the glass fishbowl. 3 hours later, at Gate K-12 in Chicago, the abstract concept of efficiency became a very loud reality. The gate agent, a woman named Linda who had worked for Aether for 10 years, picked up the microphone. Her hands were shaking. There were 280 passengers waiting. Businessmen in suits checking their Rolexes. A student orchestra traveling for a competition. A family taking their grandmother to see Europe for the last time. Ladies and gentlemen, Linda said, her voice echoing in the terminal. I regret to inform you that Aether Airlines Flight 882 to London has been cancelled due to crew availability. The sound that rose from the crowd wasn't just a groan, it was a physical wave of anger. Why? A man in a tailored suit shouted, marching up to the podium. Is the plane broken? No sir, the plane is fine, Linda said, looking out the window at the gleaming Boeing 777 sitting perfectly still at the jet bridge. Is it the weather? No sir, the weather is clear. Then why aren't we flying? We don't have a pilot, Linda admitted, bracing herself. So get another one. The man screamed, slamming his boarding pass on the counter. You're a major airline. You surely have backup pilots. What kind of operation doesn't have a backup pilot for a transatlantic flight? Linda looked at her screen. She saw the empty reserve list. She remembered the memo about cost cutting. She remembered Elias packing his box. We used to, she said softly, her voice barely audible over the shouting. We used to. In Highland Park, the morning sun was filtering through the blinds, but I was staring at a storm that wasn't on any weather map. I sat on my couch, my iPad propped up on the coffee table. The flight-aware notification I had promised myself I wouldn't check was staring back at me. Aether 882, ORDLHR, cancelled. I put my coffee down. It tasted metallic. It begins, I said to the empty room. I didn't need to be in the OCC to know what was happening. I could see the invisible lines of contagion spreading across the map. Because Flight 882 was cancelled, the aircraft, tail number N772A, was stuck in Chicago. That meant Flight 883 from London to Chicago tomorrow was dead. That meant the crew waiting in London to fly that plane back would sit in their hotel until they timed out. But it was worse than that. The first officer who was supposed to fly with Captain Jenkins, the healthy one, was now stranded in Chicago too. He was rostered to fly a different leg from London to Dubai the next day. Now, he wouldn't be there. So the Dubai flight would cancel. I watched the screen. In the span of 10 minutes, 3 more notifications popped up. Aether 491, ORDMIA, delayed. Aether 202, ORDDEN, delayed. The Chicago hub was starting to clog. Without the London flight leaving, the gate was occupied. The incoming plane from Miami had nowhere to park. It was sitting on the tarmac, waiting for a gate that wouldn't open. The crew on that Miami plane was burning their legal duty time while idling on the taxiway. Tick, tick, tick. My phone rang. The screen lit up. Ben, OCC. I stared at it. I visualized the panic in the fishbowl. I visualized Julian Vane screaming at a map he didn't understand, trying to bully physics into submission. I let it ring. I couldn't help them. I couldn't conjure a pilot out of thin air. The system was doing exactly what I told Julian it would do. It was eating itself. The voicemail picked up. I swiped over to the weather app. I looked at Denver. Chicago was the spark. But out west, over the Rockies, the barometer was dropping like a stone. A massive winter storm was coalescing, gathering moisture and energy. Patient zero has fallen, I whispered. Now comes the plague. Julian Vane stood in the center of the operations control center, watching the red chevron of Flight 882 blink on the big board. To him, it was a singular annoyance, a red pixel on a field of green that represented a lost revenue opportunity, a sunk cost of refunded tickets and hotel vouchers. He ran the numbers in his head, 300 passengers at an average ticket price of $800, plus the cost of rebooking them on United or American. Maybe a $250,000 hit. It was messy, yes, but manageable. It was a bruise, not a broken bone. He didn't see what Ben saw. Ben wasn't looking at the money, he was looking at the metal. The Boeing 777-300ER, tail number N772A, was a massive physical object that occupied a specific amount of space at Gate K12 in Chicago's busiest terminal. It was supposed to leave at 8 a.m. It was now 9:30 a.m., and the aircraft was still sitting there, a 200-ton aluminum barricade. Get the plane off the gate, Julian ordered, gesturing vaguely at the screen. If we aren't flying it, move it. We have incoming flights from Miami and Dallas that need that spot. We're trying, sir, Ben said, pressing a headset to his ear, his voice tight with rising panic. I'm on the line with Chicago Ground Ops. The problem isn't the plane, it's the people. You need a cockpit crew to taxi a 777. We can't just tow it across active runways without a pilot in the seat to operate the brakes and radios. Then find a mechanic, Julian snapped. Find someone. The mechanics are union, Ben shot back, losing his deference in the heat of the moment. They aren't authorized to taxi aircraft across active runways during peak hours. We need a pilot. And we don't have a pilot. That's why we canceled the flight in the first place. Julian stared at him, his mouth opening and closing slightly as the circular logic finally hit him. He had created a paradox. He needed a pilot to fly the plane away, but the lack of a pilot was the reason the plane was stuck. On the screen, a new problem bloomed. Flight 491, arriving from Miami, had just landed. It taxied off the runway and pulled up toward the terminal, looking for a home. But its home was occupied by the ghost of the London flight. The Miami pilot keyed his radio, his voice broadcasting over the speakers in the OCC. Chicago ground, Aether 491. We are holding short of taxiway Bravo. Our gate is occupied. What's the ETA on that 777 moving? Ben looked at Julian. Julian looked at the floor. Aether 491, Ben said into his headset, expect a hold. We are working on a solution. Copy that, Ops. Just be advised, we have 20 minutes of tarmac time remaining before our duty clock runs out. If we don't block in by 10 a.m., this crew goes illegal. The ripple had begun. 3,000 miles away, in a glass-walled townhouse in London, the ripple made landfall. The crew for the return flight, Aether 883, was waking up. They had spent 24 hours on layover, resting for the long haul back to Chicago. They were fresh, rested, and ready to fly. But they had no airplane. Because N772A was stuck in Chicago, there was no metal arriving at Heathrow. The senior captain in London, a grizzled veteran named O'Malley, checked his iPad while eating breakfast. He saw the cancellation notice. He sighed, putting down his coffee. He called the London station manager. I see the inbound is scratched. What's the plan? We have to cancel the 883, Captain, the manager said. 300 passengers stranded here. We're trying to rebook them on British Airways, but everything is full. And us? O'Malley asked. What do we do? You wait. We'll try to get the plane out of Chicago tomorrow. You're extended on layover for another 24 hours. Roger that, O'Malley said. But you know the contract. If we stay another 24 hours, we require an additional 12 hours of rest before we can fly again upon landing. You're pushing our rotation into next week. I know, Captain. I know. The ripple expanded. The crew that was supposed to fly the next leg, from Chicago to Tokyo, was waiting for O'Malley's crew to bring the plane back. Now, the Tokyo flight had no plane and no crew. It was a mathematical infection. One missing pilot in Chicago had effectively deleted 3 massive intercontinental flights from the schedule, erasing $4 million in revenue in the blink of an eye. And it was still morning. Back in Highland Park, I watched the disaster unfold on my iPad with the detached horror of a pathologist performing an autopsy. The data told a story that Julian Vane couldn't read. I saw Aether 491, the flight from Miami, still sitting on the tarmac in Chicago. The timestamp showed they had been holding for 45 minutes. They're gone, I whispered. The duty clock is the absolute law of aviation. A pilot can be on duty for a maximum of 14 hours. That clock starts the moment they report to the airport. It doesn't stop for delays. It doesn't stop for traffic. And it certainly doesn't stop because the CEO fired the reserve pilots. At 10:05 a.m., the notification popped up. Aether 491, MIAORD, arrival delayed. Crew illegal. The pilots on the Miami flight had timed out while sitting 50 feet from the terminal. They were legally barred from operating the aircraft any further. Even if the gate opened right now, they couldn't taxi the last 50 feet. They had to power down the engines on the tarmac and wait for a tug to tow them in. This meant the passengers on Flight 491 were trapped in a metal tube, staring at the terminal building they couldn't reach. But the real damage was to the schedule. That Miami crew was supposed to get off the plane, have a 1-hour lunch, and then fly Flight 205 to Denver. Now, Flight 205 had no crew. The cancellation count ticked up. Aether 205, ORDDEN, cancelled. I picked up my phone and texted Jim Miller again. Me, Miami crew just timed out on the tarmac. That kills the Denver leg. Jim, it gets worse. I'm hearing from the union rep. The active reserve pool is dry. They are calling guys on their days off offering 200% pay. Nobody is picking up. Me, why not? Jim, because they're angry, Elias. They know what Vane did to us. They know he cut the safety net. They aren't going to bail him out so he can get his bonus. It's a silent strike. I put the phone down. A silent strike. The pilots weren't organized enough to call it a union action, but the sentiment was universal. They were tired. They were overworked. And they were watching their colleagues get fired for efficiency. So when the phone rang on their day off, they simply let it go to voicemail. Inside the fishbowl, the atmosphere had shifted from annoyance to siege warfare. Julian Vane had taken off his suit jacket. He was pacing the length of the glass office, shouting into a conference phone. I don't care what the contract says. Julian yelled at the vice president of flight ops. Get them in the air. Offer them triple pay. Offer them stock options. I want bodies in cockpits. Mr. Vane, the VP's voice crackled over the speaker. We have exhausted the call list. We have left voicemails for 400 pilots. We have 3 acceptances. 3. And the soonest they can get to the airport is 2 p.m. That's too late. Julian slammed his fist on the glass desk. The Denver bank leaves at noon. Ben knocked on the glass door and entered, looking like a man marching to the gallows. Sir, Ben said softly. The Chicago station manager is online too. The passengers from the cancelled London flight are rioting. They can see the plane sitting at the gate. They don't understand why they can't board. Security is requesting permission to call the police. Tell them to rebook the passengers, Julian said, running a hand through his hair. Get them on other airlines. We tried. United is full. American is full. It's spring break, sir. Every flight out of Chicago is oversold. We have nowhere to put them. Julian walked to the window and looked down at the OCC floor. The big map, usually a comforting display of order, was starting to look like a Christmas tree. Yellow warning lights were popping up in Chicago, Miami, and Dallas. The red cancellation icons were multiplying. How did Elias handle this? Julian muttered, almost to himself. Ben heard him. Elias didn't have to handle this, sir. Because Elias would have had Captain Vance sitting in the crew lounge at 6 a.m. Vance would have taken the London flight. The gate would have cleared. The Miami flight would have parked. The Miami crew would be on their way to Denver right now. Julian spun around, his eyes narrowing. Elias is gone. Stop talking about him like he's a ghost. We fixed this ourselves. What is the status of the Denver cruise? That's the next problem, Ben said, swallowing hard. Because we canceled the Chicago to Denver leg, the crew that was supposed to fly that plane is stuck in Chicago. They were scheduled to fly from Denver to Seattle tonight. Now, there is no crew in Denver to take the plane to Seattle. Find a crew in Denver. We don't have a base in Denver, sir. We rely on the incoming crews. If the planes don't arrive, the pilots don't arrive. Julian stared at him. The intricate, interlocking web of the airline's schedule was revealing itself to him for the first time. He realized that a flight schedule wasn't a series of isolated events, it was a continuous, flowing river. He had dammed the river in Chicago, and now the riverbed in Denver was drying up. Okay, Julian said, his voice dangerously calm. Focus on the hubs. Sacrifice the spokes. Cancel the flights to the small cities, Des Moines, Tulsa, Little Rock. Use those crews to staff the main trunks. We have to keep the arteries open. Sir, if we abandon the spokes, we strand crews in places where we have no maintenance and no support. If a plane breaks in Tulsa and we have no crew to fly it out. Do it. Julian commanded. Cannibalize the network to save the core. We stop the bleeding in Chicago, or we lose the whole day. Ben nodded slowly. Yes, sir. He walked out of the fishbowl and back to his desk. He put on his headset. All dispatchers, listen up, Ben said, his voice echoing over the floor. Management directive. Initiate protocol, core protection. Cancel all regional outbound flights from hubs. Reassign crews to mainline routes. We are burning the villages to save the castle. As the sun began to set over the Midwest, the map of Aether Airlines changed shape. The outlying cities, the small dots on the map, turned red. Flights to Omaha, Wichita, and Buffalo were wiped from the board. The crews in those cities were told to go to hotels and wait. The passengers were told to go home. Julian Vane watched the board, feeling a grim sense of accomplishment. He had stabilized the main lines. The Chicago to LA and Chicago to New York flights were moving, crewed by pilots stripped from the smaller routes. It was ugly, but the airline was still breathing. He checked the stock price. It was down 2%, but holding steady. The market saw the cancellations but assumed it was a localized weather event. We survived, Julian whispered to himself. We took the hit, and we're still standing. He checked the weather report for the next day. The Chicago storm had broken up. The skies looked clear. Tomorrow, Julian said. We reset tomorrow. But he had forgotten to look west. While Julian was fighting the fire in Chicago, a new enemy was gathering strength over the Rockies. A low-pressure system, energized by the jet stream, was slamming into the mountains above Denver. Snow had begun to fall at Denver International Airport at 4 p.m. By 6 p.m., the accumulation was 2 inches an hour. Normally, this would be manageable. You slow down the arrival rate. You de-ice the planes. You use your reserve crews to swap out pilots who time out waiting for the de-icing trucks. But there were no reserve crews. And the crews that were supposed to be in Denver were currently sitting in hotels in Tulsa and Des Moines, grounded by Julian's order to burn the villages. Julian had stripped the network bare just as the real storm was about to hit. I watched the radar from my living room. I saw the deep purple bruising of the storm covering Colorado. He thinks it's over, I said to the empty room. He thinks he plugged the leak. I turned off the iPad. He just locked the doors of a burning building. The snow in Denver does not fall like it does in movies. It does not drift gently past street lamps in picturesque flakes. At Denver International Airport, which sits on a high plateau exposed to the raw fury of the Rockies, snow arrives horizontally. It is driven by 40-mile-per-hour winds that turn the tarmac into a blinding white sheet of ice and confusion. By noon on Saturday, the blizzard had enveloped the airport. The iconic white-tinted roof of the terminal was invisible from the control tower, swallowed by a squall line that the meteorologists had predicted but Julian Vane had chosen to ignore. Inside the cockpit of Aether Flight 505, Captain David Reynolds stared at the digital clock on his instrument panel. The numbers burned a bright, accusatory green, 1645 Zulu. In local time, it was almost 10 in the morning. His Boeing 737 was sitting in line for the de-icing pad, a process that usually took 20 minutes. Today, he had been sitting in this line for 2 hours. He looked out the side window. He could barely see the wingtip, but he could see the buildup of wet, heavy snow accumulating on the flaps. Ops, this is Aether 505, Reynolds keyed the radio, his voice thick with exhaustion. We are number 4 for the glycol trucks. Do you have an ETA? We are burning fuel sitting here. Copy 505, the ground controller crackled back. The trucks are refilling. There's a backlog. Expect another 30 minutes. Reynolds did the mental math instantly, a calculation that every pilot dreads. He looked at his first officer, a young kid named Harris who looked like he was about to vomit from stress. Harris held up his iPad, displaying their legality chart. Captain, Harris whispered. If we wait 30 minutes for the spray, and then take 20 minutes to spray, we time out. We hit the 14-hour duty limit right as we finish de-icing. I know, Reynolds said. He rubbed his eyes. I know. They were supposed to fly to San Francisco. A full flight. 180 passengers sitting behind the reinforced door, watching movies, eating pretzels, oblivious to the fact that the 2 men flying the plane were about to turn into legal pumpkins. Under Federal Aviation Regulation Part 117, a pilot's day starts the moment they check in. It ends 14 hours later, hard stop. It doesn't matter if you are 5 minutes from takeoff. It doesn't matter if it's sunny. It doesn't matter if the CEO screams. If the clock strikes 14, you are done. To fly 1 minute past that limit is a federal crime punishable by license suspension. Reynolds keyed the mic again. Dispatch, Aether 505. Be advised. We have 40 minutes of legality remaining. If we are not wheels up by then, we are returning to the gate. In the Operations Control Center in Dallas, the message from Aether 505 flashed on Ben's screen as a priority alert. Ben read it and felt the blood drain from his face. He looked up at the big board. The storm over Denver was a swirling mass of purple and white pixels. Underneath that digital storm, 20 Aether Airlines jets were lined up on the taxiways, trapped in the de-icing conga line. Mr. Vane, Ben called out, his voice cracking. He didn't even stand up, he just swiveled his chair toward the glass fishbowl where Julian was pacing. We have a situation in Denver. Julian stormed out of his office, his phone pressed to his ear. He hung up on whoever it was and glared at Ben. I see the snow, Ben. It's snow. We have de-icing trucks. Spray the planes and launch them. Why is Flight 505 threatening to return to the gate? Duty time, sir, Ben explained, pointing to the crew status monitor. Captain Reynolds checked in at 4 a.m. for his first leg. He's been on duty for 13 hours and 20 minutes. The de-icing delay ate up his buffer. He's about to time out. So swap him. Julian yelled, gesturing wildly. Get a reserve crew to take the plane. Have Reynolds get off and put a fresh pilot on. Ben stared at Julian, a look of profound hopelessness washing over him. Sir. We don't have any reserve crews in Denver. Remember yesterday? You ordered us to burn the villages. We canceled the flights from Tulsa and Oklahoma City to keep Chicago moving. The crews that should have been in Denver right now. They are stuck in Tulsa. The Denver crew lounge is empty. Julian stopped moving. He looked at the board. He looked at the 20 planes sitting in the snow in Denver. Are you telling me, Julian said slowly, that we have 20 airplanes fully loaded with passengers, sitting on the tarmac, and the pilots are just going to quit? They aren't quitting, sir. They are following the law. If they fly tired, people die. The FAA wrote these rules in blood. I don't care about the FAA right now. Julian shouted, causing the entire floor to go silent. Get Reynolds on the phone. Patch me through to the cockpit. Sir, you can't. Patch me through. Ben's hands shook as he typed the command to link the satellite phone to the cockpit of Aether 505. Inside the cockpit, the sat phone rang. Captain Reynolds picked it up. This is Reynolds. Captain, this is Julian Vane, Chief Executive Officer. The voice was tinny, distorted by the satellite link, but the arrogance came through clearly. I am looking at your status. You are number 4 for de-icing. You will be sprayed in 20 minutes. I am ordering you to continue the mission to San Francisco. Reynolds sat in the cockpit of his 737, looking out at the blizzard. He could feel the wind shaking the 70-ton aircraft. He was tired. His eyes burned. His reaction times were slowing down. He had been awake for 18 hours. Mr. Vane, Reynolds said, his voice calm and steely. With all due respect, my first officer and I will be illegal in 25 minutes. Even if we get sprayed right now, we have to taxi to the runway. We won't make it. I am authorizing a waiver, Julian barked. I am authorizing an extension. You fly the plane. Think of the passengers, Captain. Do you want to strand 200 people in a blizzard? I am thinking of the passengers, sir. That's why I'm not flying. A tired pilot is a dangerous pilot. If you turn that plane around, Julian threatened, you will be explaining it to a review board on Monday morning. Do you understand me? This is a refusal of a direct order. Reynolds looked at his first officer. The kid looked terrified. Reynolds smiled at him reassuringly. He looked back at the clock. 1400 hours duty time reached. Actually, Mr. Vane, Reynolds said into the phone. I won't be explaining anything. Because as of 10 seconds ago, I'm off the clock. I am no longer legally the pilot in command of this aircraft. I am just a passenger with a very nice hat. Don't you dare. Ops, Aether 505, Reynolds switched back to the radio, cutting Julian off. We have timed out. We are returning to the gate. Please have customer service agents ready to meet the aircraft. We are done. Reynolds hung up the sat phone. He turned the aircraft tiller, steering the nose wheel away from the de-icing line and back toward the terminal. Behind him, 19 other pilots watched Aether 505 break the line. They checked their own clocks. They looked at the snow piling up on their wings. They looked at the empty crew lounges where the shadow crews used to sit. And one by one, the dominoes fell. Ops, Aether 292, we are timing out. Returning to gate. Ops, Aether 881, we are illegal. Returning to gate. Ops, Aether 404, we are done. Returning to gate. It was a mass exodus. A mutiny of compliance. In Highland Park, I watched the disaster from my living room. I had the live ATC app open on my phone, listening to the Denver ground frequency. It sounded like a surrender. Ground, Aether 66. We need a gate. Ground, Aether 12. We need a gate. Ground, Aether 99. We need a gate. The ground controller sounded overwhelmed. Aether aircraft, hold position. We have no open gates. The terminal is full. I have nowhere to put you. We can't hold, one pilot replied. We are illegal. We are walking off. You can't walk off on the taxiway. The controller shouted. Watch us. I closed my eyes. I could see it. I could see the chaos. In the old system, I would have had 6 crews sitting in the Denver Westin Hotel. I would have paid them to sleep all day. When the blizzard hit, I would have rotated them in. They would have walked onto those planes fresh, legal, and ready to fly. The tired crews would have gone to the hotel. The planes would have launched. It would have cost the company maybe $50,000 in hotel bills and per diem. But Julian had saved that money. And now, he was paying the price. I watched the tracking map. The planes in Denver weren't moving. They were turning yellow, then red. Cancelled. 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 The cancellations weren't just dots on a screen. They were people. Inside the terminal at DIA, the scene was apocalyptic. 4,000 passengers were suddenly dumped back into the concourse. The customer service desk was manned by 3 agents. 3 agents for 4,000 angry, tired, hungry people. And the planes? They were now blocked in, because Aether 505 had returned to Gate C12. The plane that was supposed to arrive at Gate C12 from Houston had nowhere to park. It sat on the tarmac. The passengers on board watched the terminal through the snow, trapped. And the crew on the Houston flight? They were ticking down too. It was a viral infection of time. The delay consumed the legality of the crew, which caused the cancellation, which blocked the gate, which caused the delay of the next flight, which consumed the legality of the next crew. It was a feedback loop. A death spiral. Julian Vane sat in his glass office, staring at the phone. He had stopped yelling. He looked pale. They just quit, he whispered. They just turned around. Ben stood in the doorway. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week, which was close to the truth. They didn't quit, sir, Ben said quietly. They timed out. It's physics. You can't cheat time. Get the Miami crews, Julian mumbled. The ones we sent to New York yesterday. Fly them to Denver. We can't, sir. Denver is closed. The airport just issued a ground stop for Aether Airlines. We have too many planes on the ground. We are blocking the alleyways. They won't let us land any more aircraft until we clear the congestion. A ground stop? Julian looked up, horrified. Yes. We are effectively banned from landing in Denver until we move the metal. But we can't move the metal because we have no pilots. Julian stood up and walked to the window. He looked down at the OCC floor. The dispatchers were slumped in their chairs. The phones were ringing off the hook, thousands of calls that would never be answered. The big board was a sea of red. For the first time, Julian Vane saw the airline not as a spreadsheet, but as a living, breathing organism that he had strangled. He had cut the fat, yes. But he had cut the muscle too. And now, the beast couldn't move. What do we do? Julian asked, his voice trembling. Ben looked at the board. He looked at the impossible knot of metal and time. We can't do anything, Ben said. The system is deadlocked. The crews are in the wrong cities. The planes are trapped. The passengers are rioting. Ben took a deep breath. There is only one person who knows how to untangle a knot this bad, Ben said. But you fired him. Julian turned slowly. He looked at the empty desk where I used to sit. He looked at the cardboard box Ben had placed there, hoping I would come back. Call him, Julian said. He won't answer, Ben said. Offer him money. Offer him his job back. Offer him anything. I don't think he wants money, sir. Then what does he want? Ben looked at the wreckage of the airline. I think, Ben said, he wants you to admit that you were wrong. Julian swallowed hard. He picked up his phone. He dialed my number. In Highland Park, my phone rang. I looked at the caller ID. Aether Airlines HQ. I let it ring. I watched the snow fall on the screen of my iPad. I watched the little red plane icons pile up in Denver like toys in a sandbox. I took a sip of my coffee. Let it ring. The storm wasn't over. The blackout was just beginning. The sun was shining in Miami. It was 80 degrees, the sky was a piercing cerulean blue, and the palm trees swayed gently in a warm breeze. At Gate D4, Flight 902 to New York was fully boarded. The passengers were settled, sipping bottled water, scrolling through their phones, waiting for the pushback. Inside the cockpit, Captain Mike Sterling sat with his arms crossed, staring at an empty jet bridge. Ops, this is Aether 902, Sterling radioed. We are fully boarded. Door is closed. We are just waiting for the first officer. Do you have an ETA on him? Stand by, Captain, the Miami ground operations manager replied, his voice sounding harried. Sterling checked his watch. His first officer, a guy named Davidson, was supposed to be inbound from Denver. The schedule said Davidson landed 30 minutes ago. But Davidson hadn't landed. Davidson was currently sitting in a hotel lobby in Denver, watching a foot of snow pile up against the glass doors, because his flight out of the blizzard had been canceled 6 hours ago. Captain, the radio crackled back. We don't have a first officer for you. What do you mean? Sterling asked. He was on the inbound. The inbound never left Denver. The crew timed out on the de-icing pad. Sterling looked out at the perfect Miami weather. He looked at the loaded plane. He looked at the flight plan to New York, where the weather was also clear. So let me get this straight, Sterling said, his frustration bubbling over. I have a perfectly good airplane. I have a cabin full of passengers. I have perfect weather here and perfect weather in New York. But because you guys couldn't get a plane out of a snowstorm 2,000 miles away, I'm grounded? Affirmative, Captain. We have no reserve pilots in Miami. They were all repositioned to Chicago yesterday per Mr. Vane's directive. Sterling slammed his flight bag against the console. Unbelievable. He grabbed the PA microphone. He had to tell 180 people that their beach vacation was ending with a cancellation, not because of a hurricane, but because of a spreadsheet error made in Dallas. In the Operations Control Center, the Domino Effect had stopped being a metaphor and had become a literal cascading failure of the network infrastructure. Ben sat at his console, watching the crew scheduling system, a legacy software platform called Sched Plus that looked like it was built in 1998. The system was designed to handle normal operations, a few sick calls, a few delays. It was not designed for a total system collapse. The software worked by matching open flights with legal crew members. It ran a constant logic loop. Is pilot A in city B? Is pilot illegal to fly? If yes, assign. But now, the inputs were garbage. Hundreds of crews were out of position. They were stuck in the wrong cities. They were timed out. They were refusing to answer their phones. The software tried to solve the puzzle. It tried to reassign pilot A to flight B. But pilot A was illegal. So it tried pilot C. But pilot C was in Tulsa. So it tried pilot D. The logic loops began to spin faster and faster, consuming more and more processing power as the algorithm frantically searched for a solution that didn't exist. Ben, a scheduler shouted. The screen is lagging. I know, Ben said, typing furiously. It's processing the Denver cancellations. No, it's frozen. I can't input the manual overrides. On the main wall, the big board flickered. The green and red chevrons froze in place. Then, the screens went black. A collective gasp went through the OCC. The hum of the cooling fans died down. The phones kept ringing, but the digital brain of the airline, the system that tracked where every plane, pilot, and flight attendant was located, had crashed. What happened? Julian Vane screamed, running out of the fishbowl. Where is the map? Turn it back on. The server crashed, Ben said, standing up, his face ghostly pale. The logic overload killed it. It couldn't find legal crews, so it kept looping until it ran out of memory. Reboot it. It takes 45 minutes to reboot the mainframe, Ben said. And when it comes back up, the data will be old. We won't know where anyone is. What do you mean you don't know where anyone is? I mean, Ben said, his voice trembling, that for the next hour, we are flying blind. We don't know which pilots are at which hotels. We don't know who is legal and who isn't. We have lost positive control of the airline. Julian stared at the blank black screens. The reflection of his own terrified face stared back at him. Get the whiteboards, Julian ordered, his voice cracking. Do it manually. Call the stations. Write it down. Sir, Ben said softly. We have 300 flights in the air and 4,000 crew members on the ground. We can't track that on a whiteboard. Do it. In Highland Park, I didn't need a computer to know what had happened. I was watching the public tracking sites, Flight Radar 24 and Flight Aware. Suddenly, the data for Aether Airlines stopped updating. The planes that were in the air continued to track via radar, but the destination data, the gate info, the estimated times, they all turned to NA. They lost the server, I whispered. I took a sip of water. My hands were steady, but my heart was racing. I had built that system. I knew its breaking point. I had warned Julian that the optimization algorithm was too aggressive, that it created infinite loops during irregular operations. He had called it legacy thinking. Now, he was experiencing legacy failure. My phone buzzed again. Another voicemail. I picked it up. It was Julian again. I pressed play on the speakerphone. Elias, Julian's voice was different this time. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a frantic, manic energy. Look, I know you're angry. I get it. You made your point. But the scheduling system just went down. We are dark. I need the admin codes to bypass the logic checks. I need to force assign crews even if the system flags them as illegal, just to get the data moving again. Ben says only you have the root password. Call me. Name your number. I'll wire you $100,000 right now. Just give me the code. I listened to the silence at the end of the message. He still didn't get it. He wanted to force assign crews. He wanted to override the safety protocols to make the computer happy. He thought the problem was the code. The problem wasn't the code. The problem was that he had no pilots. Bypassing the safety check wouldn't teleport a captain from Tulsa to Denver. I deleted the voicemail. I wasn't going to give him the code. Not out of spite, but because it wouldn't help. If I gave him the tool to override the safety limits, he would use it. He would force exhausted pilots into cockpits. He would break the law to save his stock price. And then a plane would crash. Let it burn, I said. Better the schedule dies than the passengers. By 6 p.m., the airline had ceased to function as a transportation company and had become a series of refugee camps. In Dallas, Atlanta, Chicago, and Denver, thousands of passengers were sleeping on the floors of the terminals. The vending machines were empty. The bathrooms were overflowing. The blackout in the OCC meant that the gate agents at the airports had no information. When is the flight leaving? A mother with a crying baby asked a gate agent in Dallas. I don't know, ma'am, the agent said, tears in her eyes. My screen is blank. I can't even tell you if there is a pilot on board. The pilots, meanwhile, were effectively ghosts. Without the scheduling system telling them where to go, they sat in their hotel rooms or in the airport crew lounges. They couldn't fly without a release from dispatch. Dispatch couldn't issue a release without a crew assignment. Crew scheduling couldn't make an assignment because the computer was dead. It was a perfect circle of paralysis. Julian Vane sat on the floor of the fishbowl, his expensive suit jacket thrown in the corner. He was surrounded by paper scraps, the manual manifest Ben was trying to organize. We have 12 planes in Salt Lake City, Julian muttered, reading a fax. Why are they in Salt Lake? We don't fly to Salt Lake. Diverted, Ben said, his eyes red-rimmed. They ran low on fuel holding for Denver and had to land. Now they are stuck there. We have no ground crew in Salt Lake to push them back. How much money are we losing? Julian asked. Ben didn't answer. The number was too big. It wasn't just the lost tickets. It was the federal fines. The hotel vouchers. The overtime. The brand damage. Millions an hour, Ben guessed. Maybe more. Julian looked at his phone. The board of directors had been calling him every 10 minutes. He hadn't answered. If I fix this, Julian said, a desperate glint in his eye, I can survive. If I get the planes moving by morning, I can spin it. Tech outage. Unprecedented weather. I can blame the software vendor. He stood up. We need the shadow crew, Julian said. We need those 40 pilots. If we can get them into the hubs, we can restart the heart. You fired them, Ben reminded him. They hate you. They need jobs. Julian shouted. They're pilots. They want to fly. Get HR to draft rehiring offers. Double salary. Immediate start. Send couriers to their houses if you have to. Sir, it's Saturday night. HR is gone. Then you do it. You have their numbers. Call them. Beg them. Ben looked at the phone. He looked at the list of names, men and women he had known for years, professionals who had been treated like line items on a spreadsheet. I'll call, Ben said quietly. But they won't answer for me. And they certainly won't answer for you. Ben dialed Captain Miller's number. He put it on speaker so Julian could hear. It rang 4 times. Hello? Miller's voice. He sounded relaxed. There was music in the background. Jim, it's Ben. From Ops. Hey, Ben. How's the efficiency going? Jim, please. We're dying here. The system is down. We have stranded crews everywhere. Julian. Mr. Vane. Wants to offer you your job back. Double pay. Effective immediately. There was a pause. Julian leaned in, hopeful. Ben, Miller said. Tell Mr. Vane that I'm currently enjoying a very expensive bottle of scotch that I bought with my severance package. And tell him that my lawn mowing schedule is pretty full this week. Jim, people are stranded. We need you. You didn't need me on Tuesday, Miller said, his voice hardening. You can't fire the fire department and then call them when your house is burning down. Good luck, Ben. Click. Julian stared at the phone. The hope drained out of his face, replaced by the terrifying realization that money, for the first time in his life, had no power. He said no, Julian whispered. They're all going to say no, Ben said. The lights in the OCC flickered as the emergency generator kicked in. A thunderstorm had just knocked out the main power grid in the industrial park. The room went dim, lit only by the emergency exit signs. It's over, Ben said. We can't recover the schedule. We have to do a ground stop. No, Julian said. No ground stop. That admits failure. Sir, we have lost the location of the cruise. We have lost the tracking of the planes. If we keep trying to fly, we are going to crash two airplanes into each other. Safety dictates we stop. Ben stood up. He walked over to the master control switch on the supervisor's desk. It was a physical button under a plastic cover, designed to send a stop message to every station and aircraft simultaneously via a cars. Don't touch that, Julian warned. Ben looked at Julian. He looked at the chaos. He looked at the terrified faces of his team. I'm sorry, sir, Ben said. He flipped the cover. He pressed the button. All stations. All aircraft. Global ground stop. Effective immediately. Hold positions. The airline stopped. 300 planes froze. Aether Airlines was no longer a moving entity. It was a statue. Sunday morning broke over Dallas/Fort Worth International Airport, not with the golden promise of a new day, but with the grim, fluorescent reality of a refugee camp. The terminals, designed to be transient spaces where people spent 60 minutes buying magazines and coffee, had become permanent residences for 40,000 stranded souls. The air conditioning systems, struggling against the body heat of the crowd, had given up hours ago, leaving the air thick with the smell of stale sweat, spilled soda, and desperation. At Gate C-12, the situation had devolved from frustration to insurrection. A family of 4 had set up a tent made of blankets tied to the waiting area seats. A businessman in a $3,000 suit was sleeping on top of his luggage, using his briefcase as a pillow. The vending machines had been looted hours ago, the glass smashed in by a trash can, the coil stripped bare of every bag of chips and candy bar. When the airport police arrived in riot gear at 8 a.m., they weren't there to arrest criminals, they were there to protect the airline staff. The Aether Airlines customer service desk had become a fortress. The agents, brave men and women making $15 an hour, had locked themselves inside the jet bridge door because the mob was demanding answers they didn't have. We want to go home. The chant started low, a rumble in the back of the concourse, before swelling into a roar that shook the glass walls. We want to go home. Julian Vane watched the riot on CNN from the wall-mounted television in his fishbowl office. The sound was muted, but the headline screaming across the bottom of the screen was loud enough. Airline apocalypse, Aether grounded for 24 hours, riots reported in 3 hubs. Julian sat in his ergonomic leather chair, staring at the screen. He hadn't showered. His tie was undone. The shark-like vitality that defined him was gone, replaced by a gray, hollow look of a man who has realized that the universe does not care about his MBA. Sir, Ben said, entering the office without knocking. Ben had stopped knocking hours ago. He was holding a tablet. The board of directors is on the secure line. All of them. Julian didn't move. Tell them I'm handling it. They know you aren't handling it, sir. They're watching the news. And the markets open in New York in 20 minutes. Pre-market trading has Aether stock down 45%. The banks are issuing margin calls on our operating loans. Julian flinched. The stock price. That was the only language he truly spoke. If the stock tanked, his options were worthless. His bonus was gone. His reputation was ash. Get the pilots, Julian whispered, his voice cracking. Did HR reach out to the shadow crew again? Yes, Ben said, his voice devoid of emotion. We sent couriers with contracts to all 40 houses. We offered triple salary. Signing bonuses. Full benefits restoration. And the couriers came back with the contracts unopened. Some were burned. Captain Vance. He posted a video on Twitter. He used the contract to light a cigar. Julian closed his eyes. He leaned his head back against the glass. Why? Why won't they take the money? Because you broke the covenant, Julian, Ben said, using his boss's first name for the first time. You treated them like widgets. You can replace a fuel pump. You can replace a tire. But you can't fire loyalty on Tuesday and expect to buy it back on Saturday. Ben placed the tablet on the desk. The union just issued a press statement, Ben added. They are formally advising all active pilots not to pick up any open time until competent management is restored. They are calling for your resignation, sir. Julian looked at the tablet. The press release was brutal. It didn't just blame the weather. It blamed the reckless financial engineering of the executive suite. Competent management, Julian repeated, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. I increased the operating margin by 12%. You increased the theoretical margin, Ben corrected. In reality, you just set the plane on fire. The phone on the desk buzzed. It was the red line, the direct connection to the chairman of the board. It rang with a shrill, demanding tone that seemed to drill into Julian's skull. He looked at Ben. What do I do? You know what to do, Ben said. You have to call Elias. I tried. He won't answer. He hates me. He doesn't hate you, sir. He's indifferent to you. To him, you're just a turbulence pocket. But he loves the airline. He loves the cruise. If you want him to fix this, you have to stop trying to buy him and start begging him. Julian stared at the ringing phone. He looked at the CNN feed showing the police holding back the crowd in Chicago. He looked at the big board in the pit below, which was currently a dark, dead void. He realized he had no choice. The math had finally cornered him. Get my car, Julian said, standing up on shaky legs. I'm not calling him. I'm going to him. Highland Park is a quiet neighborhood, lined with oak trees and well-manicured lawns. My house sits at the end of a cul-de-sac, a brick colonial that I bought 10 years ago with the bonuses from keeping the airline running through 3 hurricanes and a volcanic eruption. I was in the garden, pruning the rose bushes. It was a meditative task. Snip the dead wood. Encourage new growth. It was remarkably similar to operations management, except roses didn't talk back and rarely formed unions. I heard the car before I saw it. An aggressive, high-revving engine that didn't belong in a Sunday suburb. A black Mercedes S-Class screeched around the corner and pulled into my driveway, ignoring the curb. I didn't look up. I kept snipping. Snip. Snip. A car door slammed. Rapid footsteps crunched on the gravel. Elias. I turned slowly. Julian Vane stood at the edge of my lawn. He looked like a wreck. His expensive Italian suit was wrinkled, his eyes were bloodshot, and he was sweating profusely in the mild Texas heat. Hello, Julian, I said, wiping my shears on a rag. You're trespassing. The airline is dead, Julian gasped, walking onto the grass. We've been grounded for 14 hours. The stock is in free fall. The passengers are rioting. The software is bricked. I know, I said calmly. I'm watching it on TV. The coverage is quite comprehensive. You have to come back, Julian said, his voice rising to a desperate pitch. I'll give you whatever you want. Double your old salary. Triple. Stock options. I'll fire Ben. I'll make you VP of operations. I laughed softly. You still don't get it. I don't want your money, Julian. I have enough money. I have a paid-off house and a very nice garden. Then what do you want? Julian screamed, throwing his hands up. Do you want to see it burn? Do you want to destroy the company you built just to spite me? I didn't destroy it, I said, stepping closer to him. You did. You stripped the insulation off the wires and acted surprised when the house caught fire. I just watched. Okay. Fine. I did it. Julian yelled. I screwed up. I cut too deep. Is that what you want to hear? I was wrong. I looked at him. It was a start, but it wasn't enough. Admitting you were wrong is easy when you're desperate, I said. But fixing this isn't about you and me. It's about the 40 men and women you fired on a Tuesday morning via email. You disrespected the core of the operation. I tried to hire them back. They won't talk to me. Of course they won't. They don't trust you. You're the enemy. I walked over to the patio table and picked up a pitcher of iced tea. I poured a glass. I didn't offer him one. Here is the price, Julian, I said. Julian froze. He looked ready to write a check for $1 million. I don't want a salary, I said. I want full operational autonomy. You will issue a public apology to the shadow crew. You will resign as CEO, effective immediately after the crisis is resolved. And you will sign a document giving me total control of the board's emergency fund to pay the crews whatever overtime is necessary to clean up this mess. Julian paled. Resign? I can't resign. This will blow over. I just need you to restart the schedule. Then get off my lawn, I said, turning back to my roses. Good luck with the bankruptcy hearing. I hear Chapter 11 is very efficient. Julian stood there, trembling. He looked at his car. He looked at me. He looked at the invisible weight of the 50,000 stranded passengers pressing down on his shoulders. He knew that by tomorrow morning, the board would fire him anyway. If the airline collapsed, he would be sued into oblivion. If he resigned, he might salvage a shred of dignity, or at least avoid prison for negligence. Fine, Julian whispered. Fine. I'll do it. In writing, I said. Now. I pulled a pre-written contract out of my gardening apron. I had typed it up that morning while drinking my coffee. Julian stared at the paper. You knew I'd come. I told you, Julian. I predict problems before they happen. He took the pen. His hand shook as he signed the bottom of the page. He effectively signed away his career, his bonus, and his power. I took the paper back. I checked the signature. Ben, I said into my Bluetooth earpiece. Julian looked confused. You're on the phone? I've been on the line with Ben for 10 minutes, I said. Ben, did you hear that? Loud and clear, boss, Ben's voice crackled in my ear. I have the Shadow Crew group chat open. They're waiting for the signal. Send the signal, I said. Tell them Elias is back. Tell them the shark is gone. Activate the reserve. I looked at Julian. Go home, Julian. Pack your office. You're done. I walked past him toward my house. I had work to do. Inside my home office, I sat down at my desk. I opened my laptop. I logged into the secure Aether VPN using the admin root access that I had never actually surrendered. The screen flickered. The black void of the crash scheduling system appeared. I typed in a command string that I had written 5 years ago, a hard reset protocol designed for catastrophic failure. Execute, Phoenix_protocol override safety locks, auth_code_Thorne_alpha_1. The screen turned green. The system rebooted. And 3,000 miles away, 40 phones began to ring simultaneously. The Shadow Crew was waking up. The automatic doors of the Operations Control Center slid open at 11:45 a.m. on Sunday. I didn't need a security badge, Ben had already disabled the locks from the inside. When I stepped onto the floor, the room fell silent. It was a heavy, exhausted silence. 200 dispatchers, schedulers, and meteorologists looked up from their screens. They looked like survivors of a shipwreck waiting for a rescue boat. The air smelled of stale pizza and fear. I didn't stop to shake hands. I walked straight to the supervisor's desk in the center of the pit, the bridge. Ben was standing there, leaning over the master console, his tie undone, his eyes red-rimmed. He looked at me, and his shoulders visibly dropped 2 inches. The weight was gone. Status, I said, my voice cutting through the quiet room. We are tracking 312 aircraft, Ben said, his voice raspy. All grounded. We have lost crew legality on 90% of the roster. We have stranded metal in 42 non-hub cities. The passenger backlog is estimated at 60,000. I nodded. It was worse than I thought. It wasn't just a knot, it was a solidified block of concrete. I picked up the headset microphone. I flipped the switch that broadcast to the entire room and the remote stations. This is Elias Thorne, I said. A murmur went through the room. A few people stood up. Listen to me closely, I continued. For the next 6 hours, we are no longer an airline. We are a logistics company. We do not care about ticket holders. We do not care about revenue. We do not care about the destination on the manifest. I looked up at the big board, which was currently a sea of static red. Our only goal is to reset the board. We need to get the metal back to the hubs and the crews back to their bases. If we try to fly passengers today, we will fail. We are going to fly empty. I turned to Ben. Initiate the ferry plan. Convert every stuck flight to Part 91 operations. No passengers. No flight attendants required. Just pilots and fuel. We don't have the pilots, Elias, a scheduler shouted from the back. They're timed out. We do now, I said. I pointed to the main entrance. The doors slid open. Captain Jim Miller walked in first, wearing his leather flight jacket and aviator sunglasses, carrying his kit bag. Behind him was Captain Vance. Then Captain Sarah Jenkins, looking pale but standing tall. Then 37 others. The Shadow crew. They marched onto the floor in a phalanx of navy blue uniforms and gold stripes. They looked fresh. They looked rested. They looked like the cavalry. The room erupted. The dispatchers stood up and cheered. It wasn't a polite golf clap, it was a roar of relief. Jim Miller walked up to the bridge. He slammed his flight bag on the desk. Put me in, coach, Miller said, grinning. You're going to Denver, Jim, I said. It's a mess. We have 20 birds stuck in the ice. You and your team are going to ferry them out one by one. Fly them empty to Dallas. We need the metal here. Copy that. I'll take the first jump seat out. There are no jump seats. Nothing is moving. Then I'll drive, Miller said. Or I'll steal a Cessna. We'll get there. I turned back to the room. You heard him, I shouted. The Shadow crew is active. They are the skeleton key. Use them to unlock the hubs. Once the planes are back in Dallas and Chicago, we reset the clocks. We launch the morning bank tomorrow at 6 o'clock as if nothing happened. Let's work. The next 8 hours were a masterclass in operational triage. Julian Vane watched from the doorway of the fishbowl, holding a cardboard box containing his stapler and a photo of his boat. He watched as I did in 60 minutes what he couldn't do in 5 days. The difference wasn't the software. It was the philosophy. Julian had tried to solve the puzzle by forcing the pieces to fit, bullying crews, ignoring regulations, squeezing pennies. I solved it by clearing the board. By converting the flights to ferry status, Part 91, I bypassed the strict commercial duty limits. A pilot flying an empty plane operates under different rules than a pilot flying passengers. It gave us flexibility. The Shadow crew deployed like special forces. Captain Miller took a private charter jet, paid for by the emergency fund I had forced Julian to sign over, to Denver. He landed on a private strip, bypassed the chaotic terminal, and walked out to the frozen tarmac. He climbed into the cockpit of the lead Boeing 737, Aether 505, the plane that had started the mutiny. Ops, this is Shadow Leader, Miller radioed. I am in the seat. Systems are coming online. Requesting de-icing. Copy Shadow Leader, the ground controller replied, sounding shocked to hear a friendly voice. You have priority. Miller flew the plane out of Denver completely empty. No passengers. No flight attendants. Just him and a first officer from the Shadow roster. He landed in Dallas 3 hours later. As soon as he parked at the gate, a fresh crew, one that had been resting in Dallas, walked onto the plane. The plane was now in the right city. The crew was legal. The knot loosened. One by one, the red lights on the big board turned yellow, then green. It was a ghost fleet. Throughout the night, dozens of Aether Airlines jets took off from stranded cities, Tulsa, Salt Lake, Des Moines, and flew silently through the dark sky to Dallas and Chicago. They carried no one. They made no money. In fact, burning that much fuel to move empty metal was costing the airline millions of dollars an hour. Julian Vane stood by the elevator, watching the money burn. He looked at me. I was standing on the bridge, headset on, conducting the symphony. He walked over to the railing. You're burning cash, Julian said, his voice hollow. Flying empty planes? The fuel bill alone. I took off one ear of my headset. I'm buying a future, I said. If we don't reset the network by morning, this airline ceases to exist. The Department of Transportation pulls our certificate on Tuesday. Bankruptcy on Wednesday. I saved $8 million, Julian whispered. I really thought I saved it. You saved the cost of the fire extinguisher, I said. And you lost the house. Julian nodded slowly. He looked at the team of pilots and dispatchers working in perfect sync, a machine fueled by respect and competence. He realized he had never actually run this company. He had just occupied the office. The resignation letter is on my desk, Julian said. Good. What happens to me? I imagine you'll get a golden parachute, I said. People like you always do. You'll fail upward. You'll be running a hospital or a hedge fund in 6 months. I turned back to the screens. But do me a favor, Julian. What? Stay away from anything that moves, I said. Stick to spreadsheets. They don't bleed. Julian turned and walked into the elevator. The doors closed. He was gone. By 4 a.m. Monday morning, the miracle was complete. The ferry operations were finished. The hubs in Dallas and Chicago were stocked with aircraft. The crews, who had been stranded in the wrong cities, had been deadheaded home on the empty jets. They were now in their beds, resetting their legal clocks. The shadow crew had flown 20 hours straight. They were exhausted, but they had done the job. They had dragged the airline out of the mud. I stood on the bridge with Ben. The floor was quiet again. Look at the board, I said. Ben looked up. The chevrons were all lined up at the hubs. The colors were green. The schedule for the 6 a.m. push was loaded. It looks normal, Ben whispered. Like nothing happened. That's the job, Ben. We are the janitors of the sky. When we do it right, nobody notices. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Jim Miller. He was back in the crew lounge, eating a bagel. Miller, job done. Can I go back to mowing my lawn now? I smiled. Me, not yet. Check your email. I had sent a mass email to the entire Shadow crew 5 minutes ago. Subject, reinstatement and promotion from Elias Thorne, VP of Operations. Effective immediately, the strategic reserve is reinstated permanently. All back pay is authorized. Furthermore, Captain Miller is promoted to chief pilot. We fly at 0600. I put the phone down. Ben, I said. Yeah, boss? Go home. Sleep. I'll take the morning watch. You sure? I'm sure. I've got my crew back. Ben grabbed his jacket and left. I stood alone on the bridge. The first rays of the sun were hitting the windows of the fishbowl office above me, the empty office. Down below, a dispatcher keyed his mic. Aether 101, pushback approved. On time. Copy, pushing back. The first plane moved. Then the second. Then the third. The clock started ticking again. 3 months later, the air conditioning in the Rayburn House office building in Washington, D.C. was humming, but it wasn't enough to stop Julian Vane from sweating. He sat at a small wooden table covered in microphones, a pitcher of water, and a stack of legal binders prepared by lawyers who charged $1,500 an hour. Behind him sat the board of directors of Aether Airlines, looking like a row of stone gargoyles. Across the room, sitting on an elevated dais, was the Senate Subcommittee on Aviation Safety. Senator Warren, a former Air Force pilot from Arizona, leaned into his microphone. The sound echoed through the chamber, broadcast live on C-SPAN. Mr. Vane, the senator said, peering over his reading glasses. In your opening statement, you claimed that the total collapse of Aether Airlines operations on the weekend of March 12 was due to an unforeseeable software anomaly compounded by a historic weather event. Is that your testimony under oath? Julian adjusted his tie. He looked polished, but there were dark circles under his eyes that makeup couldn't hide. Yes, Senator. The scheduling algorithm entered a logic loop that crashed the servers. Without the servers, we lost visibility. It was a technical failure. A technical failure, the senator repeated flatly. And yet, we have sworn testimony from your former director of operations, Mr. Thorne, stating that the software crashed because it was trying to solve an impossible equation. Specifically, it was trying to find pilots that did not exist. Julian took a sip of water. His hand trembled slightly. Mr. Thorne is a disgruntled former employee who was terminated for resisting modernization. His view is biased. The senator picked up a document. I have here an internal memo dated March 8. Subject, termination of strategic reserve. In this memo, you explicitly order the firing of 40 reserve pilots to save $8 million. Is this your signature? It was a cost-saving measure, Julian said defensively. The airline was bloated. 3 days later, the senator continued, ignoring him, we have a transcript of a satellite phone call between yourself and Captain David Reynolds of Flight 505. In this call, you ordered him to fly his aircraft despite being past his federal duty limit. You threatened his job. Is that correct? Julian froze. He looked back at his lawyers. They were staring at their shoes. I was trying to get passengers home, Senator. It was a crisis. It was a felony, Mr. Vane, the senator snapped. Coercing a fatigued pilot is a violation of federal law. And because of that coercion, and the subsequent system collapse, Aether Airlines lost $400 million in market cap in 48 hours. You didn't just break the law, you broke the company. The senator turned his gaze to the gallery behind Julian. Mr. Thorne, please stand up. I stood up from the back row. I was wearing my old suit, the one I wore to the OCC every day. I didn't have a lawyer. I didn't need one. Mr. Thorne, the senator asked. In your professional opinion, was this disaster preventable? Yes, Senator, I said clearly. It cost $8 million to prevent. Mr. Vane decided that was too expensive. The final bill for the cleanup was considerably higher. Thank you. Sit down. The senator banged his gavel. This committee finds that the management of Aether Airlines engaged in gross negligence. We are referring the matter of Mr. Vane's conduct to the Department of Justice for potential criminal prosecution regarding the violation of crew duty limits. Furthermore, we are recommending that the FAA permanently revoke Mr. Vane's eligibility to hold an executive position at any Part 121 air carrier. Julian sat stunned. The color drained from his face. This wasn't just a slap on the wrist. This was a death sentence for his career. He wasn't failing upward this time. He was being cemented into the foundation. As the hearing adjourned, the reporters swarmed. I hung back, watching from the corner. Julian pushed through the crowd, trying to reach the exit. He saw me. He stopped. You recorded the call, he hissed, his eyes wide with betrayal. The call with Reynolds. You recorded it. I didn't record it, I said calmly. The OCC records all satellite communications for quality assurance. You knew that, Julian. Or you would have known it, if you had ever bothered to read the operations manual. They're going to claw back my severance, Julian whispered, the reality hitting him. The gross negligence clause. If I'm indicted, I lose the package. I lose the stock. You lost the boat too, I assume, I said. Julian looked at me with pure hatred. You planned this. You let me hang myself. I told you, Julian. Gravity always wins. I just cleared the runway for you to land. I walked past him, out into the bright sunlight of Washington, D.C. My phone buzzed. It was Ben. Ben, we're watching the live stream in the pit. The whole floor is cheering. When are you coming home? Me, flight leaves in an hour. Is the board green? Ben, green as grass, boss. Shadow crew is on station. The return to Dallas was quiet. I flew commercial, sitting in seat 3A of an Aether Airlines jet. The captain came out before takeoff to shake my hand. He didn't say anything, just gave me a nod and a firm grip. That was enough. When I walked back into the operations control center the next morning, the nameplate on the door of the fishbowl had been changed. Elias Thorne, Vice President of Operations. I walked inside. The glass walls were the same, but the atmosphere was different. The smell of fear was gone, replaced by the low, steady hum of competence. I sat at the desk Julian had bought. It was too big, too modern. I made a mental note to replace it with my old battered oak one from storage. Ben walked in, holding a tablet. He looked rested. He had shaved. Morning, boss, Ben said. Here's the morning brief. We have a line of thunderstorms moving through Atlanta. Potential 2-hour delays. Do we have coverage? I asked. Shadow crew Atlanta is activated. Captain Vance is already at the airport, drinking coffee. We have 2 spare crews in the hotel. Good. Pre-cancel the secondary routes if the delay exceeds 3 hours. Protect the hub. Already done. The algorithm suggests it, but I set a manual override just in case. Good man. I looked down at the OCC floor. The big board was a beautiful tapestry of green chevrons moving in perfect synchronization. It was a clock, and it was keeping perfect time. Ben, I said. Yeah? Did we ever find out what happened to Julian? I heard the board sued him for breach of fiduciary duty, Ben said, a small smile playing on his lips. And the DOJ is actually pressing charges for the coercion thing. He's looking at community service and a lifetime ban from aviation. Rumor has it he's trying to get a job at a logistics firm for trucking. I laughed. God help the trucks. I turned my chair to face the window. I looked out at the tarmac of DFW, where the tails of Aether Airlines jets were lined up like soldiers. The world had returned to normal. The passengers were complaining about the pretzels. The shareholders were complaining about the fuel costs. The pilots were complaining about the hotels. But the planes were flying. I reached into my drawer and pulled out a small, framed photo. It was the crew of the first flight out of Denver after the blackout, Captain Miller and his team, standing in the snow, giving a thumbs up. I placed it on the desk next to the stapler. Efficiency is a myth. You can't optimize humanity. You can't algorithm your way out of a storm. The only thing that keeps the world moving is the slack in the line, the extra pilot, the spare part, the shadow crew waiting in the lounge. I picked up my coffee. It was cold. Perfect. All right, Ben, I said, putting on my headset. Let's run an airline.